With Storware Backup and Recovery, you can easily protect a wide range of different sources. My name is Marcin Kubacki, I'm Chief Software Architect at Storware, and this is going to be a short overview of its features. Let's start with a brief overview. So you can see that the architecture shows you a wide range of sources, as I mentioned, and starting from virtual machines that covers not only typical, let's say, managers like VMware, Hyper-V, but also OVIRT-based or some HCI, so Nutanix, Scale. We recently added also Vert. From the containers perspective, you can see obviously Kubernetes, OpenShift, but Proxmox also has containers in them, so that's also another cool platform that you could use in terms of the protecting the containers. In the cloud area, notice that we have OpenStack-based environments, like for instance Virtuoso, OpenNebula, and obviously the public cloud providers as well. Storware supports Microsoft 365. It's really important to mention. Some storage providers, like for instance Ceph, they obviously can be replicated, but you may also wish to backup them with a plain typical backup solution like Storware. But also we have option to support specific features for Nutanix, like the Nutanix volume groups or files, which are built into the Nutanix platform. In the applications module, we have a generic approach, so it allows you to easily integrate with virtually any application that has some commands or maybe your custom scripts and protect the application in a native way. We recently also added OS Agent, so that supports Linux, Windows, and recently we have added also Mac OS. So not only agentless, but also agent-based option to protect your platforms. All of that can be stored in the file system, object storage, tapes. We also have Tape Manager, and enterprise backup providers such as, let's say, IBM's, Dell's, Veritas, and so on. Now, if you go a little bit more deep dive into the architecture, if you look at the central point, Storware Backup and Recovery, it's one component, central brain of the solution. So it has a small database with all of the metadata, and this is the thing that needs to be protected in this solution. But other than that, if you have your data still present, you can actually reinstall everything and restore this simple database, and you are ready to go. Now, APIs allow you to not only connect nodes, because nodes, our data movers, actually do the dirty job, they move the data around, but also third-party orchestration engines. So for reporting purposes, maybe you would like to actually invoke backups on demand, or console integrations, like for Horizon in the OpenStack. We also have our plugin that interacts with this API. Tape Manager is another component. Actually, you have to install it on a separate server and connect physical tape library if you would like to use tapes at all. But other than that, backup provider at the bottom is the central place where you store data. And it's abstract term, so it can be object storage, it can be obviously some file system, and so on. The biggest component here in this diagram is vProtect node. So not going into too much into the details. This is a data mover and it has integrations with all of these wide range sources. But also we have a dedicated component for the M365 and the OS receiver part, so we are able to receive data from our agents that are installed remotely. You see here Windows, Linux agent. We recently have added also the OS agent as well. But for the agentless part, the integration actually doesn't require any additional component to be installed. So for virtualization, remote OS, let's say, if you use the backup using the application integration part or the storage provider, like for instance Ceph RBD. All the data lands on the staging space and later it's being moved to the backup provider. In specific scenarios, you can directly transfer data to the backup providers, so there is no need for additional copy. For some platforms we need additional components like the VMware integration server. You don't have to install it, it's already installed with the node as well. So this integrates with the VMware. If you would like to protect OpenShift virtualization, then there is a helper pod component that is automatically deployed on your OpenShift. For the Hyper-V, there is a Hyper-V agent, not installed inside virtual machines, only on the hypervisor itself. That's actually a helper component that allows us to fetch data directly from your hypervisors. And then obviously there is cloud part, so M365 component that allows us to connect to your M365 organization and fetch data directly from there. Everything is a workflow, a part of the workflow in the solution. So technically, Brain schedules a task, or let's say a workflow. Workflow consists of several tasks. Backup actually is an export phase to the staging, and store task, which technically pushes data to your, let's say, S3 or other backup provider. Restore is the opposite process. We fetch data from the backup provider, optionally mounted, because you may want to use file level recovery, for instance, or instant recovery, or shared drives over iSCSI. So we have this concept actually, it represents several other flows that you typically would find, or maybe you just want to restore directly to your source, so import phase is required. There are obviously additional tasks, but in general, nodes are a machine to execute task. Now, let's do the live demo. Here I have the console. So this is actually a Brain and Storware Backup and Recovery server component. And obviously I start with a dashboard, so I see my success rate, protection rate, some activity, some statistics about my backup destination, staging space on my nodes, and so on. At the top I see some notifications. I'm able to see what went wrong in all of my backups. At the bottom I see my task console. It actually shows some workflow. I have finished successfully recently some backup. And in virtual environments, that's my first area, I have several tabs. Here is the place, virtualization providers, where I can add multiple sources in terms of virtualization. So that includes clouds, some on-prem hypervisors. Also notice here that I have OpenShift. OpenShift also supports OpenShift virtualization in this case, and several other platforms that I haven't even mentioned. You can connect this hypervisor and specify different strategies for your backups. That depends on the hypervisor, but in general, strategy is the way we do the backups, and some platforms have multiple strategies. Like for instance disk attachment, where you physically have to install node as a virtual machine, for instance, on the OpenStack. Or different strategy where we can reside outside of the cluster, outside of your environment, and fetch data over some APIs, SSH, etc. We run periodically inventory synchronization. It can also be invoked manually, but it ends up actually with this list of the, let's say, instances in this case, right? So I have instances, 2 instances in here, and notice that this is the place where I can show you the details, some backup statistics, backup time, for instance. It's very important to track which part took the longest. Some backup history, or option to exclude drives. Now I can obviously invoke manually backups, but usually you assign a policy and you assign schedules. In the restore window, notice that I have several options. That includes also instant recovery for some platforms like OVIRT, Ref, Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager, OpenStack, VMware, and so on. I can also restore back to the virtualization provider, where I can specify my source, other source, like for instance it's not the same hypervisor manager, but I can switch and restore it to the different environment as well. With the recent update, we also have ability to restore and migrate virtual machines. So it's a V2V capability between VMware and OpenStack. So it's very important for you to migrate virtual machines. You can also use Storware Backup and Recovery to achieve that. There is also a mount option, and as I mentioned, it's a slightly wider concept, so it allows you for file level recovery if you need to restore individual files. As I mentioned, backup policies, this is the place where you can actually automatically or manually assign your virtual environments. So auto assignment works on a different criteria that includes tags, clusters, etc. But in general, the rules tab is the most important because it actually gives you the key information about when to do the backups. Synchronize as well, because you can have a dedicated synchronization schedule. Synchronization between backup destinations, because you can optionally enable secondary backup destination. And this is the place where you specify retention settings. Some platforms also have snapshot management policies, so not only we are able to export data periodically, but also just create and rotate snapshots. So such policy differs in terms that it doesn't have too much settings, it just only specifies for how long and for how many of these snapshots have to be kept on the source. Recovery plans, that's the place where you are able to create a batch plan for recovery, like let's say recovery plan 1, and create rules. Those work slightly different because my rules have to be aligned with the type of the hypervisor, but other than that it's pretty much the same, so you can optionally in this case assign schedules, but the restore parameters are quite similar to those that you have already seen in the restore model, with the exception that those are sort of mapping based, so you just map this network to the other network and so on. I have already one virtual machine mounted, so here I go to the details and click browse, and notice that I'm able to specify which files I would like to download or to my desktop, or use remote upload feature to remotely copy data over some SSH. Now, storage part actually allows you to protect storage providers, and in storage providers section notice that I have several of those. I have Ceph RBD that allows me to export data directly from Ceph monitors. For Nutanix, we have Nutanix files and Nutanix volume groups. So that's one of the let's say extensions especially useful for the Nutanix Acropolis users. The same backup policies allow me to create schedules, and usually they have pretty similar options. Well, in this case we have concept of storage pools, but and we don't have tags in this environment, but the concepts are pretty much the same as for the virtual environments. Snapshot management policies, especially useful for the software-defined storage where snapshots don't impact the load on the original storage provider. We also have option to mount backups directly here, so in the same way as we have for virtual machines. Microsoft 365, that's the dedicated tab in here, so notice that I'm able to protect individual user mailboxes, groups, which actually is a cover for the set of users. It's not strictly one of the groups concept in the Microsoft 365 that you may think of. Sites and teams. So whenever I add additional organization from here using my setup assistant, I'm able to define policies, and these policies allow me actually to assign specific users, groups, sites, teams from this place. And that's the place where you actually specify which specific features you would like to protect as a part of this policy. Auto-assignment in this case basically just assigns all of the users to this policy if they don't have any policy. Rule here also allows me to specify the retention settings and limit and specify the schedules. Downloads tab actually it works in a similar way to the mounted backups. It allows me to browse through the user files, user mailboxes, and then download individual files. So it requires a dedicated job, prepares me a package, and later I'm able to download package with all of the data that I need. instead of just restoring them directly back to the Microsoft 365. Agents, another source, that's the place where you actually register agents. So maybe not directly from here, you register it on the source. So when you install it on the Mac OS, Windows, etc., you will go through the registration process and the agent is going to appear in here. Agent is actually as a whole a protected entity, something that we protect, and inside the policies you are able to define which paths actually are those that you would like to protect. So notice that first of all I need to specify OS type. So you have different policies depending on the platform that you would like to protect. You can automatically also assign all of the agents to the same policy or do that manually. And finally you specify paths that needs to be protected or excluded, because you also have the option to exclude some paths, and specify backup destination. So for these agents we also support the secondary backup destination. That is something new in the upcoming release. The same as for the Microsoft 365, Downloads tab is the place where you actually are able easily to prepare a package of the data that you have selected from your browser, and then you can download it directly from the user interface as well. As I previously mentioned, there is also option to customize your backup flow totally using application backup. So using execution configuration, we have also prepared some of these sources for you. You are allowed to define a new configuration, how in general your backup process works, what are the commands that you would like to execute, and one of the things is actually type. So you can either invoke remote call, let's say your script remotely over SSH, or invoke it directly on the node. So that slightly differs in terms of the way the data is being exported. So a good example, MySQL server can be backed up using the same command, but with a different parameter, either locally, and it will dump data, let's say, on the remote server, and then we are going to transfer data to the node, or we can invoke the same command from the node and data is going to be transferred to the specific place automatically by this command. The same applies to the PowerShell. So then you define the command arguments, if you would like to export data or not, because maybe we are going just to invoke specific backup process, and then some parameters. These parameters allow you actually to create a template. So imagine that you have 10 MySQL instances, you would like to protect them in the same way, but you need to change the name of the database, right? So that's the place where you define DB name, and then you can later fill up that where? In the instances tabs. So when I click create button, I'm able to specify my credentials to the host, specify the access to which port, and which command execution config actually is going to be used. So that also will define a set of parameters later that are going to be used by this application. So for instance, environment variables. So all of these are going to later to be passed as the environmental variables to my script, and that's how I'm able to customize my flow using the generic application backup. That's obviously full backup only, and recovery procedure is going to be on your end because that's a custom way to protect the application, but nevertheless it allows us to quickly integrate with virtually everything. Now that's the sources, and in the on the right side of the picture there were backup destinations. In backup destinations, notice that I have file system based, object storage, enterprise, and tape pools. And starting from the file system, the common deployment scenario is where you use some kind of synthetic file system. Not only XFS, but you may use also NFS for that too, especially useful for sharing backup destination, DDBoost, or ZFS if you would like to use also some advanced capabilities that also has been added recently. So you can specify which node configuration. Imagine it as a kind of grouping the nodes. Okay, so group of nodes are allowed to use this specific configuration, and then some information about that are specific to this backup destination configuration. You can also customize your flow with pre-post access scripts. We have that also as well to invoke some, let's say, replication maybe, or some option to create, cast and mount volume for each backup, for each, let's say, virtual machine separately. That we also have examples for, let's say, our ISO layer. And that's the place where you specify and create backup destinations of type file system. Now, synthetic ones allow you to have faster recoveries and instant restores. That's the things that they allow, and also those are required for instant recovery capability because the backups are already synthesized, so that's the main reason. But still, you may want to specify other backup types of backup destinations, and that includes S3 or S3 compatible. Okay, S3 compatible is quite wide range of different backup destinations because that also covers on-prem deployments of multiple solutions such as Scality, for instance. And this is the place where you specify information for the S3 compatible backup destination as well. But also we support other like the Google, like the Azure or OpenStack Swift if you would like to use OpenStack Swift's native service, native object storage. We can also act as the proxy for other vendors like the Dell, IBM, Veritas, that or Micro Focus that requires specific setup of these targets, with sometimes requiring the components from, let's say, Dell or Veritas being installed on the nodes. And we also have option to create tape pools. Short scenario is like you deploy a physical server with tape library, you install tape manager component, single RPM, and then you register such tape managers in here and later define tape pools, so set of drives and set of tapes, and those are going to be automatically managed later during the backups by us, so that we are able to store data on the tapes using SCSI generic tape driver. Storware Backup and Recovery is scalable, so in terms of the scalability we can add multiple nodes. Nodes are our data movers, and they can be deployed many times with similar settings because we would like to share the settings using our node configuration and given specific amount of resources and limits like number of simultaneous tasks. So that's the way how we are able to scale the solution. Sometimes we can be installed outside, sometimes we have to reside in the cluster, so that also is sometimes requirement of the specific backup strategy, that nodes need to reside, let's say, in the OpenStack or not, because actually it has two strategies available. So we have discussed the sources, we have discussed backup destinations, and in the middle there are nodes that actually move the data around. Now, other aspects like notification center you have already seen. There is also a central place for the reporting, so you have option to check which backups and restores have been recently executed, what's the size, let's say, per virtual machine hypervisor project, let's say if you have OpenStack, and show what is the consumption of the backup destinations storage space, or maybe you would like to see which activity, which project or which virtual machine actually has been backed up most in terms of the number of bytes. So also you can have a transfer size report, and it also can be exported in different formats. The same applies for other types of the sources. We have also audit log for auditing purposes. And in terms of access management, there are actually a few things to note. Usually it's a local database of the users, and those users can form groups, roles. The roles are especially useful because you can either give access to the whole sections of the application, like system level, For instance, you would like to have the permissions to the nodes, virtual machines, and so on, or maybe you would like to give it more granular access and give permissions only related to this specific hypervisor, and then specify that virtual environments and instances will have permission to just backup or just read the instances. So it's more granular, so you have role-based access control available as well. In terms of authentication, it's also worth to mention that we can use internal database, like already I mentioned, but we can also authenticate using Keycloak or LDAP if you have Active Directory or others. As you can see, Storware Backup and Recovery easily is able to protect a wide range of different sources and store data in different backup providers. Using multiple nodes, you can easily scale the solution up. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for the other videos.